Hi, welcome to EC&M Tech Talks. This is a series of how-to videos where we cover everything in the electrical construction and maintenance industry, from basic theory, how some of our equipment operates and so forth. We cover the codes and installations that apply to our work out in the field, as well as we look at some of the specific equipment and talk about some of its nuances and operational characteristics and so forth. Anyway, so welcome. I'm Randy Barnett. I'm your host for today. And Tech Talk series is brought to you by EC&M Magazine. And you can find them if you go to ecmweb.com. So Electrical Construction and Maintenance Magazine. And here's what you need to do, as I always say if you haven't already. But anyway, go to ecmweb.com and click in the upper left-hand corner, and there's a drop-down menu. And the very first thing that pops up there at the top is premium content. And so you want to sign up for that premium content and make sure that you can access not just these Tech Talk videos, but all of the other videos and supplementary information, articles and so forth that apply to everything electrical out there in the world of industrial and residential construction and maintenance. So anyway, as I say, I'm your host, Randy Barnett. My background is I'm an electrician by trade, a journeyman electrician. I'm certified by the NFPA as an electrical safety compliance professional. I do a lot of writing of books and articles, and also still do work out in the field. I do a lot of training as well. So my job is to keep things practical as we go through, and we're going to take a look at electric vehicles today. Not just the vehicle itself we want to talk about, but we want to talk about what we often call the the charger, right? The EV charger, the electric vehicle charger. Well, that's covered in Article 625 in the code, but it's really not the EV charger. Don't be misled. What we're going to talk a lot about is electrical vehicle supply equipment, the different types of equipment we have, and some of the requirements out of Article 625. Article 625 is on electric vehicle power transfer equipment, because as we go through some of the definitions, we're going to find out that, well, it's not really the charger. The charger is in the vehicle. Okay, so what we need to do is we just need to supply power to the charger so that the vehicle can charge. Now, as far as the market is concerned, if you've been keeping up with EC&M Magazine, you found that there's a lot of growth within this industry, and a lot of growth coming, I should say. In 2021, the infrastructure bill was signed into law, and that allotted $7.5 billion to go out and build an infrastructure for these EV chargers. One of the problems with electrical vehicle charging and the sale of the vehicles right now, they say that people have a lot of charging anxiety, right? How am I going to charge? Where am I going to charge this thing? How far can I drive before I charge it and so forth? So anyway, in an effort to accommodate some of that, what they've come up with is, hey, let's go ahead and put in more of these charging stations. Now, there are three different levels of charging when it comes to these electric vehicles. We have a level 1 charger. A level 1 charger is a 120 volt charger. We plug it into a 120 volt outlet. The drawback to that 120 volt charger is it takes a long time to charge an electric vehicle. It could take several days to charge a completely depleted battery. So that's not too practical. It's okay for portable use, certainly. If I get into a bind and I need to charge my vehicle, get a few more miles charged on it or something because I'm going somewhere or whatever, that's fine. Most of our chargers that we see in our residential units and our dwelling units are going to be 240 volt chargers. And so we're going to take a look at a little simple diagram of that. But anyway, and then the level 3 chargers are the ones that we see out in our commercial parking lots and so forth. In fact, if you think about it, if you owned a storefront in town, if I owned, I don't care if it's a jewelry store or a fishing store or whatever it is, if I want people to come in and browse around in my store and spend some money, of course, why not have some electric vehicle chargers out there if a significant amount of my market is now driving electric vehicles? And we see that increasing. You just got to look around on the roadways when you're driving around. So anyway, I'm going to put in some commercial chargers maybe at my facility. Now, that's going to be, you've probably heard it referred to maybe as a fast charger or a DC charger or a supercharger or something like that. It charges vehicles much more rapidly. But in order to do that, I've got to have something like 480 volts to supply that. So if you think, if I have my storefront I'm thinking now as an electrical person, right? As an electrical contractor, gosh, if I've got this storefront and I want people to come in and park in my parking lot or to park in this parking lot and go into my fishing store or whatever and browse around, I've got to get 480 volts to those stanchions out there with those chargers on them. And to do that, I'm going to have to use some underground distribution most likely, huh? So we're going to use underground distribution. We may or may not have to have a disconnect installed. And oh, back at my service, can I handle these chargers? So I may have quite a bit of electrical work to be done when it comes to installing these chargers. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory also shows on its website a plan to actually install these electrical vehicle supply equipment to install this equipment out along the interstate highway systems every so many miles, so that people can have a convenient, place to stop and get their vehicles charged. So anyway, I think there's a great potential market in the electrical world. And as I say, take a look at some of the other articles in EC&M magazine, not only on the technology and the installation and so forth, but on the marketing as well. There's a good article on that. So next thing let's do is let's take a look at some of the requirements in Article 625. And to do that, I'm going to put up a little diagram on the screen for you where we're going to talk about some of those different requirements. So here we have a very simple diagram. It shows the electric vehicle over here on the right-hand side, and it pulls up to its charging station, as we might call it. Its supply for the charger that's actually in the vehicle, in other words. And it's going to connect to this device to the vehicle, and that's going to be supplied from the electrical vehicle supply equipment. And of course, we have to get some power for that. So we're going to come over here and go to our premises wiring system. We can use attachment plugs. This shows 50 amp receptacles, but we could certainly use, in fact, that's probably more common. I've seen more 40 amp receptacles than I have 50 amp receptacles for this equipment. So we can use an attachment plug and plug in to a receptacle in the premises wiring system, or we can, of course, hardwire as well. And we'll look at some of the definitions. We'll begin with, we have two power supply cords, right? We have our power supply that comes from our premises wiring system, and then we have the output cable that goes to the vehicle itself. As we look at some of our definitions, let's go to Article 625 and in section 0.2, so 625.2, and I'm using the 2020, by the way, the 2020 NEC, of course, which is our latest edition on this Tech Talk, though we're waiting for the 2023 to come out. And anyway, looking at some of these definitions, we see something called the cable management system is the first definition. And it's designed to control and organize cables. So let's look at talking about in 625, it specifies the length of these cables. If I have something like a portable unit, and my general rule is going to be 25 feet, by the way. So if I have a portable unit, the length of the power supply cord and the output cable must not be greater than 25 feet. Now, there are some provisions for that. It can, if the unit is the EVSE, the supply equipment, in other words, is actually fixed in place, then I can or fastened in place, I should say. There's different terms we're going to see. If it's fastened in place, then the output cable is allowed to be 25 foot long. Now there are further provisions. If I have one of those level 3 chargers that is, 480 volt supply to it, and you think about it, I have several of these stations out in my parking lot, I might need to have my output cable longer than 25 feet. So that is permitted if I have a listed cable management system in place on that equipment then. Now, so a couple other items. My circuit's going to have to be an individual branch circuit. And so you can find that definition back in Article 100. I am going to have GFCI protection, and it's going to be, I have to consider my supply equipment as continuous duty. Well, right away I think, well, continuous duty, I can go back to Article 100, and Article 100 tells me that, oh, continuous duty means it's going to operate at maximum amperage for 3 hours or more. Well, I would expect that for electric vehicle charging. Now, bingo, when I hear, continuous duty, what goes off in your mind? Right, 125%. So my power supply cord, my overcurrent protection is all going to be supplied or sized at a minimum of 125% of whatever that amperage is on that electrical vehicle service equipment, then the EVSE station. Is a disconnect required? Well, the answer is yes and no. On things like my 480 volts equipment, where I come out my level 3 charging, in other words, I'm probably going to be required to have a disconnect within sight of the supply equipment. Ventilation, is ventilation required? And the answer is, well, it depends. If it's specified that ventilation is a requirement, we have table 625.52 in Article 625 that specifies the CFM requirement based on the branch circuit ampere rating. Now let's talk about some of these other types of charging units that we might have, and we'll do that by going back to the definitions in 625.2 then. So we have the electric vehicle connector, and those are going to be the same for most vehicles. There is adapters made so that I can plug, even if my car manufacturer doesn't match up to the present connector that I'm going to use, there are adapters that you can now get. So yeah, you can get everything to match up and just use one type of EVSE in order to supply different types of vehicles then. Also, another term that we have is the electric vehicle power export equipment. And this is fairly new. I've only seen one of these systems in place. And if I lose my primary power at my facility, so if I lose power at the facility, I can use my electric vehicle, the battery in my electric vehicle, to discharge back into my facility, my building, my home, whatever, and supply loads. And so that's called bidirectional charging, or bidirectional power is the common term you'll hear. But it's electric vehicle power export equipment is what it's called. And obviously there are several provisions for that. In fact, one of the big ones is, if you think about it, if I'm going to use my electric vehicle to supply the equipment in my facility, then I now have what? I now have an optional standby system, and that's Article 702. So if I have bidirectional charging equipment for my electric vehicle, I'm going to end up going back to Article 702 in the NEC to find out specific installation requirements there. The electrical vehicle supply equipment we've already talked about, the blue box here in the middle. But by definition, it's the equipment including the outlet that is used to provide electrical power at voltages greater than or equal to 30 volts AC or 60 volts DC. And of course supplies the vehicle itself then. Now, fastened in place versus fixed in place, two different terms for this whole system. If my system is fastened in place, then that changes some of my installation requirements. And also, by definition, fastened in place means that I do not need a tool in order to remove my supply equipment. If the equipment is considered fixed in place, then I would need a tool in order to remove that equipment. Something else that comes up is a term you're going to see references to the primary pad, the output cable to the primary pad, and so forth. So what I can do is, instead of taking this connector and having to plug into my vehicle, I can just pull over a certain pad called a primary pad, and this output cable will now provide output to my primary pad. And through the process of electromagnetic induction, I can induce a voltage into the charging unit inside that electric vehicle and charge my car. So the whole advantage is I don't have to plug in or unplug that connector onto my vehicle. That's called wireless technology, and there's a definition for wireless power transfer equipment then. Equipment consisting of a charger power converter and a primary pad. The two devices are either separate units or contained within one enclosure. So actually, Part 4 of Article 625 addresses the wireless technology itself and its installation requirements. So anyway, so those are the basics then for our Article 625. We talked a little bit about some of the specific requirements, but obviously, as always, you need to spend some time in Article 625 if you get involved in installing this equipment then. So now let's finish up and go back, and we'll return to a few of the maintenance requirements on electric vehicle supply equipment. Well, let's wrap up with maintenance of our Article 625 equipment then. So what I'm going to refer to is the current, as of this Tech Talk, NFPA 70B. This NFPA 70B is the recommended practice for electrical equipment maintenance, and it's a 2019 edition. Now, I've already mentioned it. In fact, we've got an upcoming Tech Talk on it where we're going to talk about the new NFPA 70B, which will become a standard for electrical equipment maintenance. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to tell you the information that's currently in the NFPA 70B. And then in a later Tech Talk, we'll discuss a little bit about the additional information that's going to be in the NFPA 70B standard then. So Chapter 34 covers our electrical vehicle supply equipment. In fact, in this older edition of 70B, it talks about it as electrical vehicle charging systems. Anyway, it recommends that business owners and municipalities should have some type of maintenance program. Well, this is under a recommended practice. We may very well see a change in that wording. They won't be using recommended anymore in the 70B once it becomes a standard. So it talks about having a maintenance program in place. It says we have to document it, which is no surprise. And it says that the maintenance program must be done by a qualified person. Did you know that there's already test equipment on the market to test our level 1 and level 2 chargers, as well we can test the output on the level 3 chargers as well. So the test equipment's out there, it's evolving, it's changing, the industry itself is growing. So I think we're going to see more and more certainly on maintenance. Now, it also in 70B, it recommends that at the time of installation is when you implement your maintenance program. So that's kind of a, well, hint, hint, right? If I'm the contractor installing this equipment, maybe it's time to talk about some long-term contract specifications and so forth for maintenance of the equipment. I think we're going to find it required. What is the maintenance currently right now on it? It does not mention the testers that we can purchase and use on this equipment. It does, however, talk about visual inspections of cords and cables and power supplies and so forth, as well as we would want to verify any GFCI protection or that protection system that it talks about to ensure that people are protected from electric shock when they're using the supply equipment and so forth. So anyway, we've got some initial good information in NFPA 70B in the 2019 edition on maintenance, but there's going to be a lot more coming. So anyway, so that's our time for today. The main thing is to hang on to your hat as this EV market starts to grow. Once again, I'm Randy Barnett for EC&M Tech Talks. This is brought to you by EC&M Magazine, which is a portfolio of the Endeavor business publications. The main thing is that you go out of here today and you'll work safely.